Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Nakanoon webinar on airports as energy hubs. Just some housekeeping items before we get going. The presentation slide is available to download in the handout box on the GoToWebinar control panel. You can also find there the question box where you can log your questions throughout the presentation, and we will address them at the end with a Q&A session. So I will hand it over to Jared to start the presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sharon. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jared Esselman. I am the Vice President of Future Air Mobility at WSP, previously the Director of Aeronautics. I started my career in aviation in the United States Air Force on the C-17 Globemaster. I later worked in the White House and graduated from Harvard University with a master's in public policy. Now, I tell you this to point out that while we're talking about the electrification of airports and airports as energy hubs, I am not an electrical engineer. I am speaking from the perspective of a policymaker and how policymakers that you work with and that you are might perceive the process itself of electrification of the airport. I'm also speaking from my experience as a state aeronautics director. I was the director of aeronautics in Utah for 7 years, and have my own efforts to make airports more sustainable. So that's where I'm coming from today, and that's where I wanted to get on your level. As a firm, WSP has a depth of experience in aviation with over 1,500 aviation programs worldwide, serving more than 600 airports across 40 countries. Our firm offers full service, so we do actually have electric engineers, just not me. We do offer full service on sustainability, whether you're just starting out, whether you're a small airport, large airport, whether you're just thinking about electrification or you're already operating quote unquote off the grid. We do offer all kinds of services for sustainability wherever you are in the process. So today's agenda, I want to talk about what's driving the electrification of airports. How do you get there? What are the reasonable approaches? Because just like any other idea, there's really big ideas, and then there's, okay, how does my airport actually achieve this? I want to talk about the benefits to airport users and the adjacent community. And then I want to talk about electric aircraft, and they're coming. We know they're coming. And what does that mean for your airport? I also want to talk about what does that mean for the future of your airport, and how do you keep doing that in the future? And then I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I do want to save time for question and answer. So let's start with why. We always want to start with why. So the aviation industry as a whole is very sensitive to the amount of CO2 and other greenhouse gases we are emitting. We know this. If you buy an airline ticket now, you can see, whether you save greenhouse gas emissions, your percentage of emissions saved. From leaded avgas to jet fuel, which is burned by the tens and hundreds of thousands of gallons, to the baggage cart and the aircraft tug, we're looking at every piece. The FAA has been funding programs to help reduce emissions and help airports plan for the very projects we're discussing today. Globally, the ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, is encouraging airports to become more sustainable for many reasons. But I particularly appreciate, among their list of 6, I particularly appreciate 1, 2, and 6 on their list. Operational reliability, yes, becoming an energy hub, creating your own power does give you that safety net, right? Where I've got to be operational. I've got to be operational within a certain amount of time after a natural disaster, or just during regular operations, standard operations. How do I become my own boss, so to speak, when it comes to power? Second, price volatility management. Energy comes from all kinds of sources: nuclear, coal, hydrogen, wind, solar, thermal, geothermal, and price can change depending on the supply of that power. certainly if you're pulling power off the grid at peak demand hours. So price volatility can be managed better as your airport becomes an energy hub. And then number six, I especially love additional revenue, right? Anytime you can decrease an operating expense and increase revenue at the same time, that's a win. That's a win-win. So I definitely love that they write lots of white papers. The ICAO puts out lots of white papers on this particular topic. I encourage you to look them up. I won't go into them today. So whether your airport is just starting to think about electrification or you're already planning for it, from that policy perspective, I want you to understand that like any good business model, you can start small. Whether you haven't started or you already are in the middle of the process, either way, if you're familiar with this practice, you can always start small on the next step. Um, there are regulations in the United States. We have Grant Assurance 24. Globally, you have, a lot of airports are privately owned and operated. You certainly have your business models that seek to be as profitable as possible. There are funding programs here in the United States and globally help uh, to help pay for these energy master planning and capital expense programs. And then there are, of course, those best business practices that can help you achieve electrification. So to start, consider using, if you're in the United States, consider using capital expenditures, AIP, or if you're global, your business models to reduce or eliminate these operating expenses, like your power bill. At the small airport that I managed, just keeping the VOR and the PAPIs, just keeping those on cost me $35,000 a year. And I would have loved to have not had to pay that. And so that's where we started. So one of the small steps you can take is solar panels. Now, solar panels are an easy way to start. They're relatively inexpensive and they can be installed on your current facilities. Now, some airports like Kokan International Airport in India here have dedicated large swaths of lands to solar fields. I don't want you to think that you have to do that. You may not need to do that. Your roof space on a terminal, or if you're small, your pilot lounges, or your T hangars, or your box hangars, that may be plenty to start with. Because again, we're talking about what's the first step, right? What's a good, simple start to begin reducing or eliminating that power bill. So you also may consider using solar panels to create, if you don't have it already, to create covered parking. Covered parking usually generates more revenue than uncovered parking. This way, you're using that capital expense. Not only are you reducing the power bill, but you're increasing your parking revenue. So that is absolutely a win-win. Furthermore, wind. Now, when we talk about wind in airports are naturally attuned to the prevailing winds. We know that. But we definitely do not want to talk about the giant windmills that you see as you drive down the highway. That's bad, really bad, obviously bad. But small vertical wind turbines are very feasible. And here we're going to take a page out of the maritime industry book. Um, I lived on a sailboat for a number of years and lived parked in a marina, and all the sailboats had these small wind turbines, and it powered our vessels when we needed to, or it charged our batteries when we needed to use electricity on our boats. And either one of these, solar or wind, may not individually be everything you need it to be, but in combination, when there are clouds and you're not catching as much solar on the panels as you want, or they're not generating as much power, if there's clouds, there's probably wind, right? There's always wind moving. And so you've got a good combination here. So in combination, the power generation and money savings from solar panels and small wind turbines placed along the edges and corners of buildings can really add up. And that's the nice thing about wind turbines is you put them on the corners of buildings. Here we've got one at the Detroit Metropolitan Wayne County Airport. You can see they've got a line right on the edge of that building because there's a natural wind occurring there that continuously generates power. So once you've started, again, following good business practices, once you start small, you want to grow slow. So if you're building new hangars or new facilities, consider adding additional solar panels and wind turbines as needed. You can do this incrementally. Again, this doesn't have to be the end all be all project. You can do these very, very slow. Now, as you begin to add panels incrementally, now's a good time to start thinking, okay, how much of my power bill have I reduced? Have I eliminated it? Am I keeping all the lights on? Is there excess power? Am I sending excess power back to the grid? Can I store that? Rather than sending it back to the grid, now can I store it? And also, um, this is where you really get into, let's talk to the utility and the community, and can we offer them, I won't say provide power to the community, I will say offer the community the airport as, and many of you probably already do this, but especially for small GA airports, this is now resiliency. This is now added community resiliency where if there is a natural disaster, the airport can be that, hey, we've got power, we've got water, we've got space, we've got storage, we can be this center of resiliency for the community. As we consider doing that, you also consider storing, like I said, storing any excess power generated. Airports, now this is where it gets a little tricky. Airports are not utilities, and you don't want to be regulated as a utility, but so selling power can be a little tricky. However, land leases can be negotiated to include power. Typically at your airport, if you've got a row of T hangars, the airport owns those T hangars. Typically, not in every case, I understand that, but this is, I'm batting the averages here. T hangars usually owned by the airport, and power's included. I have 2 T hangars at Salt Lake International. I don't pay a power bill. However, just across the apron, the corporate hangar who negotiated a land lease and then built his own hangar, he has a power bill, he has a water bill, everything that he wants in there. If he wants to build his hangar just bare bones, that's fine. But if he wants power and water, he had to bring it out. So that land lease didn't include those, so he has a power bill. But the airport can negotiate those land leases to include power generated by the airport. Now, I will say this, from a policy perspective, look into your state and local regulations on this, because here, in most places I've been, the airport cannot sell the power off airport because they're not a utility and they don't want to be regulated as a utility, but they can provide airport generated power to an airport tenant if it's negotiated through the land lease. It's a little bit of a loophole, but from a policy perspective, that's where I'm coming from. You do have to look that up though. I don't, I understand we're all over the United States, we're all over the world here. You're going to have to look that up. Be happy to help you if you need a little help on that. But it can be done. While it's being done, okay, if you're selling that power, and again, quote unquote, selling that power to airport tenants, you're generating excess power. So that's great, but now storing it is also very, very critical. So how do we keep that power on the airport? And how do we use that power on the airport? And that's where microgrids become more and more necessary. So rather than just sending power back to the grid, the AC grid, the airport can store their own power in battery banks. These battery banks allow the airport to use the power to avoid brownouts, to avoid natural disasters or losing energy in a natural disaster. If the grid goes down for some reason, if a transformer goes down, you still have that power stored in a microgrid on the airport, and you can do that. Now, at this point, I want everybody to understand, I've got a picture of a General Electric microgrid here. These can be very expensive or relatively cheap. However you go, batteries have a huge range of price. So, and there's wildly different chemistries, wildly different styles. You may want someone to help you figure out what's right for my airport. Is it a shipping container full of individual cells, or am I looking at a larger battery? What's right for my airport? Um, the main the main benefit of having a microgrid battery bank on the airport is really the ability now. So from this point, we've been generating our own power, we've been storing our own power. Maybe you're still pulling off the utility a little bit, maybe you're still pulling off the grid, but at this point now, this microgrid battery bank allows you to, not only store that generated power and then distribute it, but it allows you to just sip energy off the grid, right? Why is that important? Well, your power bill is dependent on how fast you draw power from the energy grid. So if you're pulling it at peak hours and you're pulling a lot of energy at a peak hour, you're paying a premium for that. And if you ask any utility and ask them, say, hey, how can I really optimize my power bill and optimize my power usage? They'll say, be consistent. Whether it's a huge amount of power, a megawatt, or whether it's 5 kilowatts an hour, be consistent. And so this battery bank then allows you to sip off the grid consistently and avoid peak demand hour charges, which peak usage charges will eliminate any money savings you had from all of the other projects we've talked about. So that's the benefit of this. Also, a microgrid or a battery bank allows the airport the opportunity to charge electric aircraft. Whoa, what do I mean by that? Okay, well, we know electric aircraft are coming. To embrace the electrification of aircraft, airports need to build their understanding and capability of providing electricity as an aviation fuel, right? We all know how to sell avgas, we all know how to sell jet fuel. How do we sell electricity as a fuel? And so solar panels and small wind turbines, they're great. They're going to keep the lights on, eliminate your power bill, but they may not produce enough energy to actually recharge fleets of aircraft. One or two, sure, but a fleet, maybe not. Aircraft pull a lot of energy really fast. Really quickly, I'm going to nerd out a little bit here, just for fast charging. If this may or may not land in your universe, but when an electric aircraft recharges, it needs a fast charge, right? They want a fast charge. They can sip for a while, but nobody flies for an hour and then charges for 4 hours. They want to fly for an hour and charge for 20 minutes, fly for 2 hours, charge for 30 minutes. So fast charging of aircraft batteries requires a DC to DC connection. Well, your battery bank, your microgrid is DC, and the battery in the aircraft is DC. You put a charger in between them, and now you have a DC to DC connection, which is one of the other benefits that microgrid allows. And I've put this spiderweb pentagon chart on here. So just to talk about a little bit about it, for aircraft, the amount of discharge, the peak power duration, the battery cycles on the life cycles on the batteries, and the fast charge frequency, all are give and take, right? The more you fast charge a battery, the lower the life cycles are going to be. The more you have peak power duration, the higher the discharge rate is going to be. So it's a lot of very give and take there, and we can talk about that. Happy to answer any questions on that, as I actually work with building electric aircraft and the infrastructure for electric aircraft. Just wanted to show you how that works, but happy to talk about it. So a couple of different electric aircraft variants that you might see at your airports. For your regional airports, you look on the left here, you've got the Airbus E-Fan. It's fairly new, but it is working. It actually flew across the English Channel 2 months ago. You've got the Aviation Alice, which is a 9-passenger, all-electric commuter. It's in process of its certification and is looking to be certificated next year. You've got the Magni X, which is the electric transition of this popular Cessna Caravan. Your airport might see this really soon. It's an STC. They take they take a Caravan. All of us know them, and they just make it electric. It's an STC. It's going through the FAA right now. That's probably one of the soonest regional aircraft you'll see at your airport. However, you might see fleets of trainers first. So here we have the Diamond DA40, which is being transitioned to electric. That is very, very close to certification. You might see, if you have a flight school at your airport and they fly Diamonds, you might see that STC come sooner rather than later. The Pipistrel Velis up at the top right, that is flying today and is operating in a few flight schools in Europe. It doesn't hold a particularly long charge, but it is good for an hour 20-minute flight. And then here's the shiny new toy, the eVTOLs. These eVTOLs, Joby, Archer, Whisk, the Alea from Beta, they use a lot of power and they're going to take a lot of power. Now, they're not coming to your airport tomorrow. That's the good news. We've got time to plan for this and we've got time to prepare. But there are a lot of variants of electric aircraft that are flying and are ready to go. So what does that mean for the future of your airport? How do we create enough power to recharge fleets of aircraft? Well, we might have to look at nuclear, right? Solar powers and wind are great, but when we're dealing with megawatts, we're going to need something more powerful. Now, we're not talking about the big cooling stacks over here on the left. I don't want you to think The Simpsons and giant nuclear reactors. No. The Argonne National Laboratory and the U.S. Department of Energy have described micronuclear reactors as so small. This is their description. So small they can fit on the back of a truck or a standard 40-foot shipping container. It's very, very small. You've got plenty of room on your airport somewhere for a 40-foot shipping container. And these reactors have the capacity to go from a few kilowatts to 20 megawatts. 20 megawatts would power your airport, charge every aircraft you can possibly imagine, and probably provide a little bit of power and resiliency to the local community. So these are an option. Are they ready yet? No. But we need to start considering, but airports need to start considering, if I'm going to play this game, if I'm going to get in electrification and embrace electric aircraft, I also need to think, how am I going to provide that power? Maybe it comes from the utility, but maybe I can do that myself. And so while these are supposed to last about 20 minutes, I think I've gone 4 minutes over. I appreciate your patience. Again, I want to remind you, as you're thinking about electrification, as you're thinking about your airport as an energy hub, start small. You don't have to solve every problem on the first project. Start small, something just to reduce your power bill or eliminate your power bill. If you have about a year's worth of power bills, we can do the average. You can have planning and installation done in about 3 months. Grow slow, take your time. These things aren't going to be here tomorrow. Ground leases can take time to negotiate. Microgrids can take time to plan, and it will take time to plan and finance. And again, electric aircraft won't be here tomorrow, but you might see a flight school with a fleet start doing STC transitions within the next year. And that might be your catalyst to say, oh, I really need to start thinking about electrification because I have a flight school who's making this transition. And then long-term thinking, as a good policymaker would do, thinking about that 20, 30-year time frame. These micronuclear reactors are not going to be cheap. So how do we start planning for that? Large airports with a clear need may find this is easy to do, but a smaller airport or medium hub may say, yeah, I really need to start putting that in my 20-year plan. So I just wanted to, as we talk about the energy airports being energy hubs, this is a good start. It's not comprehensive by any means. Happy to answer any questions though. Here's my contact information. If you have questions or want to just start this conversation in more depth, happy to do that. And Sharon, I'm going to throw it back over to you. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to talk to those.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jared, for a fantastic presentation. I will just mention that the presentation slides are available to download in the handout box on the control panel, and please continue to log your questions in the question box. I will start with the first question. What are some energy development strategies to increase electrical capacity at the airport while we wait for utility upgrades?
While we wait for utility upgrades, that's a great question. Utility upgrades can actually take a lot longer than some of these projects I talked about here. But if you're waiting for those upgrades, try looking at solar panel and wind, right? Again, if you have your power bill for the last 12 months, um, you know, we can take an average of that and figure out how many solar panels you need combined with how many wind turbines, are optimal to start reducing or eliminating your power bill, or even just start, you know, making your airport a little more resilient if you need it. So you can start doing that now. That's a good way to start being um, more energy independent today instead of waiting for the utility.
Thank you. Could you clarify how would the fixed base operator be involved since their business model is based on selling aviation fuel?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a great question. So, um, that's right. Fixed base operators, FBOs, their business model is selling fuel. And so, if we're talking about electricity as aviation fuel, some of the things that our team at WSP does think about is, well, what's the fuel tax on electricity? How do you do that by kilowatt hour? What's the equivalent to the pennies and cents on a gallon? Or a fuel flowage fee. What do you charge on a fuel flowage fee for a kilowatt per hour, and how do you do that? And is it the airport that provides that fuel? Because in the United States, they have the exclusive right to do that, or is it the FBO? Do you work in partnership with the FBO to build the infrastructure or purchase the infrastructure to then provide that power? Very, very good question. Definitely some that we've thought about, and definitely something you should think about as you go down this path.
Thank you. The next question is, could you use parked electric cars in long-term parking as batteries, obviously with the owner consent and potentially reduce costs?
Could you? You technically, yes. Technically, the answer is yes. Now, would you want to? And would the owner want to? That is a much longer conversation on battery cycle life. How many charges, discharges that battery can have? Because a Tesla has a different cycle life than, say, a Nissan Leaf. It also has a different discharge rate than a Nissan Leaf. So could you? Yes, technically you could. Do you want to? That's the question. That's the bigger question you have to answer.
Thank you. I will take the last question here. Do you foresee airports becoming fully energy self-sufficient or independent in the medium long term?
Yeah, absolutely. That is very, very possible. Airports can become fully energy self-sufficient in the medium term, and for some in the very short term. Matter of fact, that airport in India that I showed, they are completely solar powered. They are completely solar powered, and it takes a large field for them to do that, and they're using some old solar panels. So yes, absolutely, it can happen, and we can help you make it happen if that's something you're interested in.
Thank you. Thank you, Jared, for a fantastic presentation. We will reach out to you with all the additional questions that were unanswered during this Q&A. So thanks for adding those. And please reach out to Jared with any additional questions that you may have with the contact details shown on the screen. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you in our upcoming sessions. Thank you so much.